One of the most challenging aspects of the UFO phenomenon is how we talk about it. UFOs are in desperate need of a smoking gun, but because we don't have one, we're forced to rely on intuition. The UFO topic, because of its ambiguity, forces us to use intuition, and this is a problem because the facts about the world can often be counterintuitive, and the nature of reality and the UFO phenomenon generally could be the polar opposite of what we believe it to be. Now, this is where the self-described skeptics jump off the boat. And I say self-described because debunkers like Mick West and Michael Shermer and scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, they're only skeptical of that which challenges consensus. They're not actually skeptical of the scientific consensus. They swallow that whole and consider all fringe notions about reality suspect. At the same time, the broader UFO community are easily fooled. I mean, just take a look at the comment section of almost any Secure Team 10 YouTube video. Secure Team 10 is a YouTuber who posts alleged footage of UFOs. And many of them, in my view, use computer-generated imagery. And some instances are so unmistakably CGI, one wonders how anyone could think they're authentic, and yet it appears that thousands upon thousands do. As always, I intend to offer an analysis which chooses a middle way. Is Luis Elizondo a friend or foe? I think it's very important to talk about this guy, Elizondo. And the more I reflect on Elizondo, the less I trust him. I think it's important that everyone stop listening to Elizondo and to view him as disinformation. And to the bigger YouTube channels out there, you should stop interviewing him. Now, I'm not for deplatforming. If you want to bring him on, go ahead, but you shouldn't. Elizondo is an expert in shaping cultural attitudes, in part by lying about who he is and his intentions. Elizondo is a spy for the CIA. Think about that. Think about how unbelievably extensive the CIA's vetting process is for recruiting special agents. What personality trait, or defect rather, is most important for a spy? Lying. A great spy is a great liar. They're chameleons. A chameleon whose loyalties reside wholly and completely with the agency they were brought up in. Not the American people, the agency. Intelligence communities like the CIA and the NSA, they're secret societies. And as it pertains to maintaining secrecy, the CIA is no different than Freemasonry, for example. They exist in part as a structural vetting institution built to keep and maintain secrets. And this idea that intelligence can't really keep secrets is absurd. The people who make this claim don't understand compartmentalization. Furthermore, I agree that most humans find it challenging to keep secrets. People like you and I might have the instinct to tell a secret once we find one, right? But in the same way that many prison inmates will never, quote, snitch, I argue that certain powerful subcultures exist which promote secrecy as their master value. They understand the power of secrecy, and they treat it as something sacred. They promote secrecy the way Christians promote honesty. The difference, however, is when the Christian lies, they're forgiven. And the same cannot be said for the consequences given to whistleblowers. The attitude from the NSA toward Edward Snowden, for example, is a murderous one. These groups do not tolerate betrayal. They seek revenge. So I ask, why then is Elizondo able to move so freely? Where is his punishment for whistleblowing? But you might be saying, Elizondo speaks generally about his time with ATIP, strategically leaving out information that would violate his NDA. Isn't this why Elizondo hasn't been punished? Well, the idea that Elizondo, on his own accord, decided to tattletale on his secret UAP Pentagon program because of bureaucracy is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Elizondo claims to have been fed up that General Mattis and the American public didn't know about these UAP incursions, so he decided to break rank and tell the New York Times what he's been up to. And by the way, here are these secret videos. Really? If Elizondo was a low-level, disgruntled employee, then maybe this kind of behavior would make sense. But you don't become a counterintelligence special agent for the CIA if you're the kind of guy who runs to the Washington Post about your secret program, right? So I don't buy this at all. It's self-evident that Elizondo is being instructed to do what he's doing. He's being used by the CIA to facilitate the now growing feed of UFO information coming from government. He's a gatekeeper of sorts. If you believe Elizondo's story, and that he was genuinely upset that the world didn't know about ATIP, and he was so aggrieved by this that he ran to the media, well, why didn't he tell the world about his time at Guantanamo Bay? Elizondo was part of a small team of intelligence officials running Guantanamo's most secret detention camp in Cuba. It was called Camp 7. It was kept secret for years. The camp was constructed to hold the 14, quote, high-value detainees being held by the CIA. There must have been an endless array of human rights abuses, including torture, at this facility. Using Elizondo's logic, the American people deserve to know this. We at least deserve a general idea of what went on there, right? If Elizondo was outraged that we didn't know about UFOs, wouldn't he have also been outraged that secret torture chambers were being operated by American souls? The truth is, Elizondo's allegiance isn't to UFO disclosure or the American people or the public at large. It's to the agency he was born into. Elizondo's father was Luis Elizondo III, a Cuban exile who was part of a CIA-sponsored paramilitary group called Brigade 2506. It was formed in 1960, and the group was created to overthrow Fidel Castro's government, which eventually led to the Bay of Pigs invasion. So this would make Elizondo the fourth in a lineage, one of which we know was a collaborator or operator for the CIA. Elizondo is born and bred CIA. He almost certainly oversaw or even committed torture against Guantanamo prisoners, and was ostensibly involved in coups d'etats, influencing both international and domestic affairs. You want my advice? Stop listening to him. Is the Pentagon's new UAP report a sign of progress or disinformation? Many were let down by the recently released 9-page, or really 6-page, UAP report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. I wasn't expecting much from this report, so after reading it, I found it to be significant. I then read it again after sleeping on it, and came away with the view I hold now, which is that this preliminary report is the most significant government document of my lifetime. And I'll get to whether or not I trust all of this in a second, but for now, I just want to reflect on the enormity of what's being conveyed here, and how it was done in the most intelligent and subtle way. This was a kind of cosmic kickoff on the world stage, and I think they knocked it out of the park. Because you have to understand, one reason why some were underwhelmed by this report is because we already knew everything that was said. Since 2017, in one way or another, we've been hearing the government tell us what it purports to know about UFOs on the mainstream media. We've just had a steady flow of information regarding off-world crafts, materials seemingly obtained from trans-medium vehicles. 60 Minutes covered UAPs. Imagine, however, that for the last 4 years, the media didn't say a word about UFOs. Imagine there was no New York Times article, or Washington Post columns, or CNN coverage, or Tucker Carlson, Lou Elizondo interviews, or seeing politicians appear to take the topic seriously. Imagine if none of that happened. Well, then I would argue that this preliminary report would have had a much different reaction. What does that tell us? It means that culturally, we've changed. Now the U.S. government can release a report to the public saying, quote, "Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. We are conducting further analysis to determine if breakthrough technologies were demonstrated," end quote. What does it mean that many of our responses to this was, well, yeah, we already know that? That indicates a significant social change in how we view this topic. Okay? In a matter of years, intelligence officials, public intellectuals, politicians, and the mainstream media have not only managed to warm us up to the idea that UFOs may not be prosaic, they've made us less sensitive to its potential reality. In other words, we've become desensitized. Although it might seem like our apathetic attitude toward UFOs is misplaced, it's actually a sign of progress, an emerging receptiveness toward the growing enigma of UFOs, and an openness to exploring novel concepts and possibilities related to the phenomenon. Simply put, the stigma is decreasing, and an acceptance toward exploring the topic through conversation appears to be the highest it's ever been. So of course the report was underwhelming. It merely reaffirmed what we already know. U.S. Navy fighter pilots appear to be continually seeing objects maneuver in ways that seem to demonstrate breakthrough technologies. And right now we know they're assessing whether or not these objects belong to foreign adversaries and have yet to rule out the possibility they belong to an off-world intelligence. That the world remained calm after this report was released is an indication that now we're ready to go a bit deeper. We're ready to hear a bit more, go a bit further. And the word preliminary is important to focus on here. This report could very well be the beginning of a continual set of public updates regarding the progress being made toward discovering the true nature of these alleged vehicles. Just don't hold your breath. The next report will come out anytime soon. If disclosure is a thing, then the only thing I can confidently say about it thus far is the process is slow, intentional, and methodical. Why did the UFO report only discuss new sightings, not old ones? If the Pentagon begins to admit that previous UFO incidents, like the Phoenix Lights, for example, were significant, and they were worthy of interest of national security, they would effectively be admitting they lied to the American people for decades. So I doubt the Pentagon will ever acknowledge any UFO event older than the Nimitz encounter for this reason. What do you think UFOs are? Well, most UFOs have simple explanations. It's important to understand that the UFOs I'm talking about are what I would call true unknowns. And these are the vehicles we've been hearing about since the late 40s. Now, I'm open to any possibility at all regarding these things, and that includes mass delusion. But I think that explanation is nearly impossible at this point. I'm open to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the interdimensional hypothesis, the demon hypothesis. But just because I'm open to exploring those possibilities doesn't mean I'm sympathetic to them. The explanation I'm currently most sympathetic to is that these objects and the inhabitants they may or may not belong to live among us, on and around Earth. The amount of testimony regarding flying saucers seen over bodies of water is never ending. The Nimitz encounter, which has become the newest UFO talking point among the mainstream, well, that occurred over a large body of water with different testimonials purporting to see movement coming from underwater. We're getting videos, albeit pretty awful videos, alleging to show objects dive into water. And the military testimony regarding objects darting out of the water dates all the way back to the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It dates back to Project Blue Book. Now, if one military person was telling the truth about what they saw about an object going underwater or coming up from the water, then we have an activity which suggests some kind of underwater civilization. If you ask Google how much of the ocean remains unexplored, they'll tell you 80%, which is nonsense. This figure comes from including radar scans of the ocean floor. They qualify that as being, quote, explored. But if we use the word explored to mean something more fundamental to the definition, I want to know if humans have seen it with their own eyes. If we apply that criteria, then the figure jumps to 99% of the ocean floor, remaining, quote, unexplored, according to livescience.com. So we don't have a clue about what's in our oceans. Ask yourself, what do you know about what's in the ocean? I know if I ask myself, I realize I don't know shit about what's going on in the deep sea. And if I defer to the experts, they don't appear to know either. It's a real mystery to us, and I think might be the space where these things live and exist. Are you finding the UFO topic more compelling, given the high-level military credentials behind recent testimonials? No. In fact, I trust military testimony less than civilian testimony. So often we hear this empty talking point, which goes something like this. These are trained observers. These are military people. This is not a drunk hillbilly in Nebraska. Well, this kind of statement is unbelievably patronizing and misleading. In my view, the spate of flying saucer sightings in rural America in the 50s and the 60s are just as compelling than anything related to the Nimitz encounter or anything related to other military encounters. It pains me to have to say this, but rural Americans are intelligent people. They're resourceful. They build strong communities. They're just as capable of seeing and reporting strange occurrences as Navy pilots are. You have to understand the stigma existed for country folk too. When they would speak out about what they witnessed and how life-changing their UFO event was, some of these people would be ostracized from their church or local communities. They'd be seen as the crazy person, like the town quack. Of course, some of these town folk made up stories for recognition or hopped on the bandwagon. This doesn't mean, however, that because some frauds existed, we ignore the preponderance of evidence coming from tens of thousands of rural Americans alleging to have witnessed flying saucers. I don't think these sightings were the result of overactive imaginations or mass hysteria or watching too much television or because rural people get drunk sometimes. I think it's a real phenomenon. Psychological, physical, whatever it is. Something was happening to rural America for decades. And I think it was real. So the next time someone says, these are trained observers, they're not hillbillies, correct them. Rural Americans in the 50s and 60s had average IQs over 100, and they could think, just as abstract and think just as critically as you and I. Resist the impulse to dismiss, and instead reflect on the enormity of the patterns found in the testimony of rural communities in America in the 50s and 60s, and how compelling that continuity is. Okay, I think I'll leave it there for now. My next video will be a return to form. I chose to put the editing down on this one and simply just outline my thoughts without being distracted by anything else. But the next video will be, as it's always been. Please let me know if you enjoy these podcast-type videos every once in a while. And a quick announcement for patrons. I've been having some issues with my tutorial links, specifically the ones which were uploaded to Vimeo. I think I've now been banned from using Vimeo as well, so we can now include Vimeo with Twitter, YouTube, PayPal, and Venmo among the apps which do not like what I have to say. So I'm working on getting those 2 tutorials back up somewhere. However, I'm having trouble locating the original files. So worst case scenario, I'll make another tutorial. So keep an eye out for that on Patreon. And as always, if you enjoy my videos, please consider supporting them on Patreon or Subscribestar. And I'll see you soon.